travelled across the sky, and now we can see the Milky Way.
You could slide down that white light from one end of the universe to the other. He's gone to sleep. So has Weasel.
Thank heavens! Where's Whistler?
Back to Speedy.
Well, Whisper's coming. You won't need me for a while, so I think I'll indulge in a short hunting interlude.
Good luck.
All alone, Fox. You, me, and the youngster.
So like his father. It makes me afraid.
Mom,
She's coming.
I'm hungry.
Soon.
Where'd we get to in the story?
Your father, Bold, had left the park. Forever. Long afterwards, I met a crow who told me some of the story. He was perched in a tree in a copse, a day's journey from the park, and he had noticed the young fox dancing with his shadow in the meadows. Foolhardy, he thought, exposing himself to the view of men and in broad daylight. But Bold didn't know the ways of men. He'd lived in the park all his life. The only man he had known was the warden. I had told him, of course, but he wouldn't listen to me. As far as he was concerned, there was nothing to fear. Filled with the spirit of adventure, he leapt into the sunlit meadows of the great world. Everything was a game at first. He was still a cub at heart, and he played with fallen leaves, throwing them into the air and chasing them. But slowly, as the day wore on, Bold became hungry. Freedom was fine, but not on an empty stomach. And on that first night out in the wide world, Bold's stomach was rumbling just like yours is now, Husky. Following his nose, he came across a dead pigeon and started eating that. But the crow was watching him from the trees, and the crow objected. Why wasn't Bold hunting fresh prey? He might leave easy pickings for weaker creatures to feed on. Bold didn't understand. His upbringing had taught him to kill only when necessary. There was nothing wrong with scavenged food. But if the crow was hungry, he offered to share the pigeon. Now the crow was really surprised. This fox was a strange example of his kind. Bold went off, leaving the half-finished bird for the crow to eat. Curious, the crow followed as Bold ran on, crossing the path of a man who was out walking his dog. Nothing happened, but it might have. The crow began to think this fox foolhardy indeed. Late that night, hungry again and very tired, Bold arrived at a small wood. It was fenced off, but that didn't bother him. He just slipped under the wire, and to his delight, he found a colony of game birds. It was all so easy, he thought, as he took two, then a third, and carried them off. But where to hide his booty? He sniffed out an old badger's set. Well, he thought, the badger won't mind. He was used to our badger, you see. Anyway, he went straight in, and after a hearty supper, he settled down to sleep. Early next morning, he was surprised by the return of the owner. She turned out to be a female called Shadow. At first, she was afraid of Bold, but he reassured her kindly and offered her food. And they started to talk. She told him that many foxes came to the wood, but few stayed. The human who guarded the game birds had a gun. And she showed him the gibbet with the line of stoats and ferrets and foxes hung out as trophies. But Bold refused to be afraid of man or beast. And he went on catching pheasants, as though daring the man to try to stop him. And the man did what men do. He laid a trap near the fence.
I brought you some food. What's wrong?
We were telling young Husky the story of his father.
Oh, but why?
He has to learn.
Yes, there are times when he's so like his father, and I'm proud of him. But I'm afraid for him too.
He wants adventure. What's wrong with that?
Nothing, my brave cub. Nothing at all.
So long as it is pursued with wisdom. Of course, wisdom is a rare gift. Some are born to it, and some are not.
Owls are born to it.
You took the words right out of my mouth. The easiest way to acquire wisdom is through imitation. The loftiest is by contemplation. The cruelest is by experience.
I hate to say this, but you are right, Al.
Of course I am.
Unfortunately, Bold was not very wise.
But he was kind and brave and very generous.
Yeah, and that's what Shadow thought when one night Bold found her caught in the trap which had been laid for him. The poor sow was whimpering in agony. His heart went out to her, and straight away Bold set about trying to free her.
You see? Impulsive, not wise at all.
Maybe, Owl, but I wouldn't have had him any different. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going back to join Vixen.
Will you bring me any more to eat? I'm starving.
I'll see what I can do. Be good now.
A forlorn hope, I fear.
Now, where were we?
Shadow was caught in the man's trap. Well, Bold started chewing at the wire, knowing he had to break it. He worried at it for a long time, and the poor trapped badger cried out in pain, saying she couldn't stand it for very much longer. They heard twigs cracking in the wood. A human was coming, probably the man with the gun. Shadow urged Bold to go, but he wouldn't. He just chewed on and on till suddenly he bit right through the wire and it sprang back and caught him on the eye. Bold yelped with pain, but there was no time to waste on self-pity. He helped the sow to her feet and together they scurried back to Shadow's earth. It had been a narrow escape for both of them, and Bold was wounded. His eye hurt and his vision was cloudy. Shadow urged him to leave the wood while it was dark, because the man would not rest until he had killed him. Not to be put down, Bold stole one last pheasant and shared it with his friend, before setting out into new territory. Shadow watched him go with sorrow in her heart. She said, "If ever you need a friend," and Bold said yes. If he ever needed one, he would call on her. Then he disappeared into the night. His eye was bad. He could hardly see where he was going, and he wandered onto a game shoot. He didn't know it, of course, not till he heard the gunshot. His blood froze. His instinct was to run, but which way? All round him birds were flying up into the air. The earth vibrated with the thud of men's feet. Suddenly, he ran for it. There was another gunshot, and Bold fell to the ground.
Oh no!
They had got him in the leg. Unsteadily, he rose to his feet, and dragging the wounded limb after him, Bold forced himself on, faint with the searing pain, expecting any moment to hear the sound of gunshot. At last, he came to a ditch, and he holed up there. His greatest fear now was that a dog would follow the trail of blood to his hideout. But at last the men went. Night fell, but Bold stayed where he was, faint with pain and hunger. In the morning he struggled out of the ditch and went in search of food. The wounded leg was useless. Every time he moved, pain seared through him. But he had to eat. He trailed to a small copse and looked around. There were a few blackberry bushes, ripe with fruit. It was better than nothing. Resting between every step, he made for the bush and started eating. A dormouse had the same idea. She was busy nibbling at the bush, and when Bold saw her, his heart lifted. At any other time, she would have been an easy catch, but now, as he lunged towards her, he found his jaws closing on thin air. Bold holed up for several days, unable to move more than a few steps, supplementing fruit with worms and snails. Hunger gnawed at him, pain racked him. He was getting thinner and weaker by the day. The crow swooped down to inspect him, sneering at the bold young fox who wouldn't be told. But Bold was a piteous sight, and he pleaded with the crow, "Go and find Shadow. She said she'd help me if ever I needed her." The crow was astonished. Why should he? But when Bold told him his father was the legendary Farthing Fox, he changed his tune. "I'll help you," he said. But he was only doing it because of me.
Poor Bold had sought to escape his father's shadow, only to find that it extended far beyond the confines of the park. To him, it seemed there was no escape.
Meanwhile, back in White Deer Park, we were all having loads of adventures.
At least me and Weasel were.
Hooray! The weasels are back.
And all thanks to Owlie.
Yes, good job she explained the rules of hide and seek, or I'd have been hiding forever. Luckily, though, Weasel started seeking hand. She found me. So here we are.
I'm a fool to myself.
What was happening in the park?
Well, Scarface was up to his old tricks, hunting down farthing animals.
That was mean. And on their own land, too.
Oh, not in this case, Husky. No. Hare had made his home outside Farthingland, so actually...
He was within his rights, wasn't he, Measley?
Yes, Weasel, I suppose he was.
Scarface took the female. She had just had babies, and now they were left without a mother.
Maybe they were fair game, but he did it to spite me.
Oh, he was very spiteful, wasn't he, Measley?
Oh, yes, I say, spite incarnate.
Hare brought his family back to live on Farthingland. Now the oath meant more than ever, and poor Fox was burdened with responsibility. Everyone looked to him.
You've got to sort that Scarface out, Fox.
Sort him out, yes.
But I didn't want to start a war which no one could win. I racked my brains trying to think of a way out. Then Owl said, "Scarface killed Dreamer in an underhand way. None of us could actually prove it was him. We just sort of knew. So she said, maybe we should do the same to Scarface."
Oh, did I say that?
You know you did, you pompous old bird. She shall get married, that'll sort her out.
Should get married, yes.
These old spinsters get so embittered.
Embittered, yes.
It's a shame, really, when I think how happy we are.
Shame, yes.
Well, it isn't that I haven't had my chances. I've just never found anyone to match me.
I bet you haven't.
I bet she hasn't.
Oh, be quiet. So, I started thinking, who do we know who kills by stealth?
Ada!
That weasel will be the death of me.
Yeah, well, she's right all the same. And as the weasels had more to do with her than anybody else, I sent them off to find her with a message. What a mistake to make. Why? What happened?
Well,
The message was, tell Ada he who rids me of the blue fox will be doing me a service.
that's what we said.
Yes.
I said...
Fox gave me the message too, so we said...
Shut up!
We didn't say that.
I said...
We got an important message for you.
Oh, you're always interrupting, aren't you? Never let me finish a sentence.
That's because you never let me start a sentence. Always taking it on yourself, you are.
Oh, I like that.
Yes, I know you do.
Well, if this is wedded bliss...
What did you say?
Well, now, let me get this right.
Well, you can try.
Oh, shut up. I said...
I'm getting dizzy.
I said that Fox said tell Ada that he who rids me of a blue fox...
Blue fox?
will be doing him a service. Oh, phew.
Oh, I see. Not the blue fox, but a blue fox. So what happened?
Guess.
Ada went off and killed the wrong fox?
Fox was very upset.
So was Scarface.
So was Charmer.
Don't remind me. Charmer, my daughter, had Fallen in love.
Oh!
Oh, all right. Unfortunately for her, and us, she'd fallen in love with a blue fox. Scarface's son, Ranger. Of course, I knew at once we were in for trouble. When Scarface discovered somebody'd killed one of his tribe, he'd be foaming at the mouth, and he was bound to suspect us. We had to be ready for anything. Well, I didn't want to hang about waiting for it to happen, did I? I wanted to get in before he did, and attack. But Vixen said,
Let the young ones sort this out.
I thought she meant Friendly should take Scarface on, and he was far too young for that. But Badger said no, that wasn't what she meant. She'd meant I was getting past it. I ask you. Well, I went for him, I did. Called him all sorts of things. My old friend, my dear old friend Badger, cut him to the quick, I did. Well, he upped and offed. But that wasn't what Vixen had meant either. She'd seen something I hadn't. You see, when Charmer heard the news Ada had killed a blue fox, she'd nearly fainted. And when I ordered a watch to be kept on our boundaries, Charmer was the first to volunteer. Yeah, Vixen had seen what I hadn't.
A woman's intuition, Fox. A woman's intuition.
But the fox killed by Ada was not Charmer's fox. Her fox, Ranger, Scarface's son, still lived, and was even then trying to persuade his father to make peace with the Farthing creatures. But Scarface wouldn't listen.
Surprise, surprise!
Shh! He didn't know Ada was one of the Farthing creatures, but he had a shrewd suspicion Fox was behind the attack somehow.
So when Charmer, who was supposed to be on watch, when Charmer met Ranger over on the stream boundary, they had a lot to talk about. It turned out neither of them believed in the feud between the red and the blue foxes. It was just something their parents had drummed up, while they, the younger generation, could do what they liked.
Be fair, Fox. Vixen was right. Those two young foxes might have healed the rift between the two tribes.
Maybe, but not with Scarface around. Anyway, Friendly, Charmer's brother, he was out patrolling, and he came across Charmer and Ranger, looking very matey, and quite rightly, he came to tell me. Well,
Vixen tried to keep him calm.
but when my own daughter says to me I'm in love with one of the enemy, well, she was red, he was blue. It could never work.
If I may intercede, Fox, love, as we all know, is reputed to be blind. Look at Weasel and Measley. Who would have thought it?
I don't love him.
I love you. I think you're gorgeous.
Vixen said the two young people might bring peace between the two tribes. She persuaded me to meet the young blue fox Charmer had fallen for. I agreed, but under protest, because it seemed to me we were inviting the enemy into our camp.
Meanwhile, Ranger, on his way home to Scarface's Earth, was more determined than ever to mend the rift between the two fox tribes. And when, quite by accident, he saw Ada basking in the sun, he thought his chance had come. He hurried home and he told his father a snake had killed Bounder, not a fox. Why pick on the Farthing creatures? Why didn't they just go after this snake which he'd seen that very morning basking in the sun? Scarface smiled.
Oh,
Ada was one of the Farthing tribe. What a good idea Ranger had had. They'd go after this Ada just as he had suggested. Poor Ranger had not realized Ada was one of Charmer's friends, and now he was beside himself. What had he done? Quick as he could, he went back to the farthing boundary and sought Charmer out. The two young lovers had their first argument. Ranger was hurt that a farthing creature should have been set to kill his own father. Charmer was angry that Ranger should have given Adder away.
You see, a long time ago, Adder had saved my mate, Vixen. We all owed her. And now, if Scarface was on her trail, we were bound to be upset.
So was Ada. I knew. I saw her. I had to take the news. "You've killed the wrong fox," I told her. She was spitting venom.
Well, she won't.
Of course, it was all Weasel's fault.
It's not fair. They always blame me.
Me as well.
I told her to stay low for a while.
She couldn't get much lower unless she went underground.
Very droll. Of course, I kept my eye on her, paid her visits from time to time.
Giving her hiding place away.
I was deeply concerned. She was shivering, not with fright, she assured me, but with cold. It seemed she was hungry.
Saving her venom.
What for?
What for?
Because now she was after Scarface. Having ventured out to greet me, Adder decided to stay out. And it was then Ranger saw her, basking in the sun, an attempt to keep warm.
It was almost fatal. The warmth of the sun lulled Adder into a blissful doze. She stretched luxuriously. Suddenly, a shadow fell across her. A cloud, Adder thought. And then she felt a cool breeze cross her back. She shivered. It must be getting chilly. The cold breath blew across her a second time. Adder's eyes opened. She turned her head and confronted Scarface.
Oh!
Immediately, Adder leapt into the air. She seemed to hang, suspended in an arc, before she fell to earth and whipped into a hole in the ground. But too late. Scarface was quick, and his teeth snapped closed round Adder's tail. She strove to free herself, pulling and pulling, till suddenly the end of her tail broke off, and she pulled the stunted remains into the hole behind her. Scarface's face filled the entrance to the hole. "I'm staying here," he said, "till you come out."
Ada replied, "Then you'll have a long wait, because I can go for weeks without sustenance. Can you?
Oh, you did that very well, Weasel.
Oh, thank you, Measley."
And there Adder stayed, and there Scarface stayed for a long, long time.
Meanwhile, Shadow, the badger sow, had been fetched by Crow, and now she set about feeding Bold. "Couldn't let you die," she said. "You're the son of the farthing fox."
Poor cub couldn't live it down.
And slowly, watched over by Crow, fed by Shadow, Bold grew stronger. But the reason he had left the park was because he wanted his freedom. He wanted to be independent, and he would be independent if it killed him. So, when Shadow was out, he ran off, limping. Shadow was beside herself. "He'll die," she told the Crow. "We must find him." So she followed him, tracking him to a farm where Bold was watching a chicken run. His mouth watered. It had been a long time since he'd eaten anything half so good. But there was the farmer and his dog to reckon with. Shadow was anxious. But, defiant as ever, Bold said, "A human crippled me. Now a human shall feed me."
Hooray!
And to Shadow's amazement, Bold caught one. He offered to share it with Shadow, but she wouldn't take anything. "You caught it, you eat it," she said generously. And then the two animals took their leave of one another. Shadow understood Bold. She knew he had to do it his own way. But after a few days failing to catch mice and voles, Bold was hungry again and began stalking the chicken coop. This time, he wasn't so lucky. The man came out and the dog after him. They chased him from the coop and from the farm, down a narrow country lane. Bold dived into his earth and lay there, panting and listening. He could hear scuffling overhead, and then a clanging noise. Bits of earth fell all around him, and suddenly he knew the man was going to dig him out. There was nothing Bold could do. The crow watched horrified as the spade dug deeper and deeper, till finally the poor maimed fox was exposed, cowering inside. The dog jumped, but the man put his hand on his neck and held him back. He bent down to take a closer look. Bold closed his eyes and buried his face in the earth. He felt the warm breath of man and dog. Any minute, he thought, and he would be torn to pieces. Then suddenly the man was gone, and he could hear him walking away. He had taken pity on the maimed creature he had unearthed, thinking that such a cripple could not possibly have been the culprit who was catching his chickens. But what now? Bold had to survive somehow. Hunting was impossible. So the crow suggested he try the town. There they might both live together, scavenging off human waste.
Meanwhile, back at the park...
Yes, back at the park, me and Weasel were in trouble.
Oh, good.
It wasn't good at all. Everybody blamed us for Ada's mistake, and they was out to get us.
Oh, I still cringe when I hear that whistle.
Oh, yes. Whistler was sent to look for us. Oh, it was terrible.
Terrible. You heard this whistle coming nearer and nearer, and you just knew you had to run for cover. Help! Oh, ouch!
Back again, Whistler?
Oh, we dived into the nearest bush.
Yes, a gorse bush.
I feel like a prickly pear.
A prickly pear of what?
Owl cracked a funny.
Oh, well, I'm not entirely without humour, you know.
Well, I don't think it's very funny.
Let me help you pull out the prickles, Weasel.
Oh, get off!
Get off yourself.
You once pretended to be a gorse bush, as I remember, Weasel.
Oh, yes, master of disguises, Weasel.
You made a very good bridge, Measley. I'll give you that.
Fooled him anyway.
I caught up with you eventually, however.
Yes, that was your fault, that was.
No, it wasn't. It was yours.
You ran into me.
Well, you ran into me.
Figures.
And then,
It went dark very suddenly.
guess what happened?
Whistler crash-landed on top of you.
Correct. And then Kestrel and I arrived on the scene. We knew the weasels were guilty, of course. After all, why else would they run away?
You'd run if Whistler was about to land on you.
The weasel doth protest too much.
And there and then, the assembled birds gave a verdict of
Guilty. Then came the pleasure of considering how we might best punish them.
We demand a fair trial.
They had a point, and the idea appealed. I could just see myself as the judge.
You and your big mouth.
So all the farthing animals, except the foxes and badger, gathered down at the pond. Speedy and I marched the weasels into court.
Have you anything to say before the court passes sentence on you?
I confess, Weasel gave Ada the wrong message. It's all her fault.
Creep.
Creep yourself.
You can't confess for somebody else, you know, Measley. It isn't allowed.
Anyway, I'm sure we did tell Ada to kill Scarface. We did, didn't we, Measley?
You may answer.
How do I know? You see, my lord, I mean, my lady, I always let her do the talking.
Then Toad dared to object. He claimed that if they had told Ada to kill Scarface, she would have. But she didn't. So they didn't. The Weasels are guilty. Then Paddock, Toad's mate, objected. She said it wasn't fair.
She was right.
I overruled her. Then I asked for the verdict of the jury.
The jury, which was mostly made of squirrels, started pelting us with nuts. Then I said,
Call the chief witness.
Who is that?
Ada.
Where is she?
I don't know. We could mount a search.
You are merely playing for time. And as I want to go hunting, and in the absence of any further evidence, I will pronounce sentence. For dropping Ada in it, the sentence of this court is that you both be taken to a wet place and be...
Dropped in it. Shall I demonstrate?
No!
So the two weasels got their just desserts. They were dunked in the pond.
We caught our death of colds.
What we needed was sanctuary.
We thought of Badger. Good old Badger. My old friend. Like a godfather he was to me.
But Badger was dying. One day, Mole's son burrowed into Badger's set. He hadn't seen his old friend for a while, and he found him, lying in a dream. He tried to rouse him. The old Badger opened his eyes and stared at the Mole dreamily. "Come to wake me, old pal. Time to go out hunting in Farthing Wood." At once the Mole knew something was wrong. "You're not in Farthing Wood, Badger," he told him. "You went on a long journey. Remember, you live in White Deer Park now." But Badger either wasn't listening or quite simply couldn't hear him. He closed his eyes again and saw his mother and father and his brothers and sisters all playing together, dodging the rays of the moon till the sun rose and made shadows through the leaves of the trees.
The Mole rushed to my earth to tell me the news, and Vixen and I went straight away to visit Badger in his set. He knew who I was, but he thought I'd come to persuade him to leave his old home in Farthing Wood. I didn't even try to put him right. If Badger wanted to believe he was still in his ancestral home, then let him. I said, "Badger, I'm sorry I was unkind to you." And he said, "A fox? Worried about kindness? I must be in heaven." Then he closed his eyes.
Badger had gone.
Then we rolled the stone in front of the entrance to Badger's set and stood in silence.
In the midst of life, we are in death.
Yeah, well, apart from Al's sermon, that is. Badger's death had made me think. I was getting crusty. I realized I had a lot to learn from Badger. He had grown old gracefully, and that's what I had to learn to do. I had to learn to give way and let the younger generation have its day. I wished then I hadn't been so hard on Bold. I kept wondering and wondering how he was getting on. But, well, I thought it's no good wishing. I did still have Charmer with me, though, and there was something I could do about her. I agreed to meet her ranger.
Hooray! Hooray!
Bravely Ranger came alone to Fox's Earth and met Charmer's family outside.
Yeah, it was brave. I'll give him that. And he was respectful.
Yes, sir. No, sir.
3 bags full, sir.
No, not like that. He'd been brought up to honour the older generation, and that meant he honoured his father too, Scarface. Well, it was just as it should be. But it did put him in a bit of a fix. I asked him straight, "What would you do, Ranger, if your father attacked Charmer? Whose side would you be on?" And he answered me straight. He said he'd been thinking about that one, and he decided he wouldn't fight against us, but he wouldn't fight for us either. It was a wise conclusion he'd come to.
He could have been an owl.
If he'd had feathers.
And it was all I was going to get. So I had to be satisfied with it. Of course, Charmer was all over me. "Thank you, Dad," and so on and so on. But I told her she hadn't got my blessing yet. Then Ranger said, "I'll keep my part of the bargain. You can be sure of that."
Husky's fallen asleep.
Shall we sing to him?
No.
Rock-a-bye, foxy, deep in your
Oh
earth.
dear.
Time to put time into your mirth. Oh, little foxes, including you, slay through the daylight, even if they're blue.
Except it isn't daylight. And I was asleep.
Oh Lord.
Weasels.